Level 1. Heaven and Hell. Billions of people over thousands of years have believed that death is not a full stop, but a gateway. That after the last breath, we face judgment, heaven or hell. Eternity divided into two infinitely different states, bliss or agony. The idea of heaven and hell is one of humanity's oldest attempts to give death meaning. In many cultures, death was never regarded as the final end. On the contrary, it was often seen as a transition, not into nothingness, but into another reality, where everything a person did in life is in some way evaluated. Heaven is an image of absolute bliss, peace, eternal love. It's the ideal the soul strives for. Hell is the opposite: suffering, isolation, torment. These concepts appear in the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. But in one form or another, they exist almost everywhere. The Egyptians weighed the heart on scales. The Greeks sent souls to either Elysium or Tartarus. But where does faith end and metaphor begin? What if heaven and hell are not physical places, but states of consciousness, or archetypes embedded in the collective imagination so that people can cope with the fear of the unknown? Philosophers have often asked, can eternal retribution for a finite life be just? And if God is all good, can He condemn someone forever? Or, on the contrary, is hell not punishment, but voluntary separation of the soul from truth, from meaning, from love? The modern person, raised on science and skepticism, may not believe in heavens, but the idea of retribution lives on. In conscience, in the sense that some actions must have consequences even if no one knows about them. Heaven and hell are not so much about the afterlife as about the hope that life has a moral vector. And in this sense, perhaps heaven and hell do exist, not as locations, but as an answer to the eternal question: what was it all for? Total non-existence. I think this is the most terrifying and, unfortunately, the most realistic option of all possible. Most likely, after death, there will be nothing. No light at the end of the tunnel. No rebirth, no divine judgment, just disappearance, complete, without a trace. You are gone, no body, no thoughts, no I. Like before birth, only with no chance of replay. You no longer need to believe in the invisible, no need to hope or fear. Death is like a dreamless sleep, only without awakening. Absolute silence, absolute peace. The materialist and scientific approach often leans toward this conclusion. What we call consciousness is merely a function of biochemical processes in the brain. When this organ ceases to work, our I also goes quiet, as unremarkably as the image on a screen disappears when the computer's video card burns out. We don't build philosophical constructs around the fate of a tree that slowly rots away and rarely ask where the soul of a dog goes when it dies. Humans have proclaimed themselves the pinnacle of evolution, so they deserve something more. But from the viewpoint of bare biology, we are just a lucky accident, one of the countless branches of the tree of life. If an ancient mammal hadn't gotten the needed mutation, we'd still be nimble primates gathering fruit on the forest floor. Philosophers have had different attitudes toward this idea. Epicurus believed that fearing death is absurd. When it comes, we will no longer be there to feel it. The fear, essentially, arises not from the idea of non-existence itself, but from the inability to imagine emptiness. We can't imagine the absence of ourselves, and that is the root of anxiety. Some find peace in this. If there is no punishment after death, if there is no pain, then there is nothing to fear. For others, on the contrary, this is the most frightening prospect, to disappear completely, leaving nothing, not remembering, not continuing. And yet, despite the frightening simplicity of this theory, it leaves one philosophical question open. If consciousness is just electrical impulses, why does the feeling of I exist at all? And can we be sure that when it disappears, everything else disappears too? And then only one question remains. Does anything in our short lives have any meaning? Reincarnation. The idea that death is not the end but the beginning of something new is surprisingly ancient. Reincarnation suggests that after physical death, the soul or consciousness is reborn in a new body, perhaps in a human body, perhaps an animal, or maybe something else, unimaginable. It all depends on how you lived. In Hinduism, this is called samsara, a never-ending cycle of births and deaths. The goal is to escape it by attaining liberation. Actions accumulate, forming karma, and it is karma that determines who you will become in your next life. This idea can be frightening. You are not you, but the consequences of your actions still follow you. Buddhism takes this concept and makes it even subtler. There is no eternal soul here, but there is a stream of consciousness, causality, inertia. You don't transfer yourself into a new body. You pass the baton. It's not exactly comforting, but it doesn't cut everything off into emptiness either. Something continues. Ancient philosophers also pondered this. Pythagoras, Plato, for them, the transmigration of souls was a way to explain memory, intuition, the feeling of not the first time. The soul, in their view, learns, grows, and eventually remembers its true nature. Today, many see reincarnation not literally, but as a metaphor. Perhaps rebirth is about changes within a single life, new stages, new personalities in the same body. But for millions of people around the world, it is not a metaphor, but a reality, even if unproven. Can you remember your past lives? Did they exist at all? And if so, where do you end and someone else begin? Level 2. Agnosticism. Of all the theories about what happens after death, the most honest may sound like this. We don't know. Not because we don't want to know, but because perhaps it's fundamentally impossible. Agnosticism is not a position of despair, but of caution. It does not claim that there is nothing, nor insist that there is something. It simply says we have no reliable data. We haven't been to the other side. Those who died have not returned with unambiguous answers. Therefore, everything we think about death remains in the realm of faith, assumptions, and symbols. The philosopher Thomas Huxley, who first introduced the word agnosticism in the 19th century, believed that the human mind should refrain from pretending to know where there is no possibility of verification. This is not skepticism for its own sake. It's a rejection of the illusion of control. We don't know what will happen after the last perception fades. And perhaps we aren't meant to know. Some find anxiety in this uncertainty. Others, freedom. If nothing is predetermined, if there is no guaranteed heaven or hell, then every action is our own choice, not supported by fear or reward. This makes life more fragile, but also more real. Of course, people have had visions, mystical experiences, stories of clinical death, but all of them are subjective, contradictory, and easily explained by physiology. Still, to dismiss them entirely is also hasty. Perhaps they are reflections of something we just can't describe yet. Agnosticism is an acknowledgement of limits. We don't know. Death as awakening. What if death is not the end, but awakening? Not in a metaphorical sense, not just realizing something important, but literally. Life as a dream, and death as the exit from it. The sense that everything happening was no more than an illusion, a temporary dream of the mind whose true nature awaited on the other side of the last breath. This isn't a fantasy of those who survived clinical death, nor a science fiction plot. Such ideas can be found in spiritual and philosophical traditions of many eras. In Hinduism, for example, the world is called Maya, an illusion, a temporary projection of consciousness. In Taoism, there's an image of a man who dreamt he was a butterfly and upon waking couldn't tell. Was he a man dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of a man? Death as awakening is a hypothesis in which our very I is not who we think we are. Perhaps our personality, memory, thoughts, and feelings are only temporary constructs, and the real essence observes all this as a performance, having forgotten it sits in the audience. Such a view is no less frightening than ideas of non-being or judgment. It calls into question the authenticity of experience itself. If life is a dream, who is the dreamer? And why did they invent all this? Some mystics have said that death is a return, as if we have already been there, we just forgot. As if this whole life was a necessary dream to awaken as someone else, more complete, more aware, or finally having forgotten. Philosophically, this theory intersects with questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and being. And perhaps death as awakening is not an answer, but another way to ask the question, what if this isn't all? Collective consciousness. There is a version that death is not disappearance, but a return, not to heaven, not to a new body, but to something much older and universal. The consciousness we consider ours is actually just a drop in a large stream, and when a person dies, this drop returns to the ocean. Collective consciousness is the idea that we are all connected to a single source of mind, like neurons in a common brain, like branches of one tree. In life, we feel separate. We say I, my thoughts, my fears. But perhaps this is only a local illusion, a kind of isolation for the sake of experience. After death, when the boundaries of body and memory disappear, only belonging remains. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, not as an afterlife, but as a deep layer of psyche where universal images and structures common to all humanity lie. Archetypes, dreams, intuitions, perhaps all these are echoes of something that connects us at a level elusive in everyday life. Eastern teachings also have similar ideas. In Advaita Vedanta, for example, it is said that Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the all-being, are essentially one and the same. What seems like a personal I is really a manifestation of the one. Death, in this logic, is not an end, but a return to unity. Some modern theories of consciousness, especially those related to quantum physics and the information field, also flirt with this idea. That consciousness does not arise from the brain, but only manifests through it, which means it can continue to exist even if the host, the body, disappears. Of course, all this sounds beautiful, almost comforting. But there is also anxiety. If you dissolve into the all, won't you disappear as a personality? Or maybe you never were one to begin with. Panpsychism. Usually we consider consciousness something rare, a privilege of living, thinking beings. Humans, yes, dogs, maybe. Stones, unlikely. But panpsychism offers a different view. Consciousness is not the exception, but the rule. It's everywhere, in everything, just manifested differently. From this perspective, consciousness does not arise inside the brain, like light from a bulb. Rather, the brain is a device that focuses and amplifies something that's already everywhere, like a lens gathers light. Then death is not the disappearance of consciousness, but loss of form, dissipation, transition from an organized state to a diffuse one, but not an empty one. Ideas of panpsychism go far back. Plato and the Stoics spoke of the soul of the world. Spinoza saw nature as a single substance in which thought and extension are two aspects of one thing. In the 20th century, philosopher Alfred North Whitehead developed process metaphysics, where even atoms have experience. Modern proponents of panpsychism, such as Galen Strawson, try to solve the main riddle. How does subjective experience arise from dead matter? Their answer, it doesn't arise. It has always been. It is just brighter in humans than in a dust mote. But the dust mote also feels at a level beyond our understanding. What does this mean for death? Perhaps after the brain is destroyed, you will no longer be you in the usual sense. But some subtle trace of experience, sensation, presence may remain. Maybe you don't disappear, but simply diffuse, become less focused, but still part of the experience of being. It sounds strange, almost esoteric. But could it be that death is not the disappearance of subjectivity, but its dissolution into the general background? And if so, where is the boundary between life and everything else? Echo of consciousness. Not everything dies at once. Even if the soul is an illusion and after death nothing alive remains, a person does not disappear completely. Their voice, movements, habits, jokes, fears, thoughts, all this leaves a trace, invisible but real, like an echo that continues long after the source has fallen silent. We rarely think about how much of us remains in others. Someone will repeat your phrase. Someone will change their life after a conversation with you. Someone may not even remember your name, but in some way will be your continuation. Consciousness, in this sense, does not need to be transmigrated or saved. It simply reflects in everything it touched. Modern people leave especially many such traces. Photos, messages, videos, recordings, even writing style. All this can outlive you for years, decades, maybe forever. Even now, there are programs capable of resurrecting people through neural networks by their voice, vocabulary, facial expressions. It may not be you, but it's your silhouette, your echo. Philosophers have spoken about this before, albeit in other words. Heidegger believed that true death is not the moment of biological cessation, but the loss of authentic being in the eyes of others. As long as you mean something to someone, you exist, even if you are gone. Proponents of the informational approach to consciousness believe that any system that influences others preserves itself through interaction. You are not only what's inside your head, but everything you triggered in this world. Good, bad, unpredictable. Death of the body does not always mean complete disappearance. Something of you will continue to sound, not loudly, not clearly, but distinctly, like an echo in the mountains that no one can stop anymore. Level 3. Eternal return. Imagine that all this is not the first time, that you have already lived this life, already read these words, already died, and then were born again, made the same choices again, forgot again that it all had already happened, and so endlessly. The idea of eternal return is no less frightening than the idea of non-being. If death is not the end, but a restart of the same program, then everything you do is doomed to repetition. The same pain, the same mistakes, the same joys you once already experienced, without the right to change anything. This thought arose in various cultures, in ancient India, in ancient Greece, among the Stoics. But it is most closely associated with Friedrich Nietzsche. He did not claim this was physical truth. He posed a challenge. Would you want to live your life again exactly as it was, without omissions, without rewinding, everything from the very beginning? Eternity, not as reward, but as repetition. 20th century physics tried to provide its own answers. In some models, the universe is cyclical. It is born, expands, dies, and is born again. On the other hand, there is no memory in such cycles. If you forgot everything, were you really there? Some find something comforting in this theory. No finality. Everything can be lived through again. Others, on the contrary, see it as a closed trap, a hell not of fire, but of endless repetition of the familiar. And maybe this is just a metaphor. Even in this life, we often return to the same things. Repeat words, make the same mistakes, walk the same tracks. Maybe eternal return is not about the cosmos, but about us? Death as exit from a simulation. What if you don't die, but wake up or disconnect, like a character in a game whose player leaves? In this case, death is not the end of life, but an exit from it, or, if you like, from a simulation. The idea that our reality isn't real seems insane, but philosophers, scientists, and billionaires discuss it seriously. One version was popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom. If a technologically advanced civilization can create simulations of consciousness, then statistically we are more likely in a simulation than in the original. Then death is not disappearance, but disconnection of the interface. You are no longer the person with their name, body, experience. You are the one who played that role, or watched, or just started the process. Simulation theory proponents compare death to shutting down a computer, or to moving to another level, depending on the settings. You may not remember you're in a system. That's part of the design, like in a dream where everything seems real, until you wake up. Philosophically, this hypothesis sounds like a modern metaphor for Plato's cave. We live among shadows, taking them for reality, and death is turning your head or stepping outside. Some find relief in this idea. If it's a simulation, then the real I is somewhere else, and perhaps alive, or at least exists. Others are scared. If everything is artificial, then what is real, and who is watching? There is no proof nor refutation, only a strange feeling that sometimes arises deep in consciousness, that something here isn't right. And maybe death is not retribution or rest, just you exited the game. Biocentrism. If you see this world, it exists. But who said it was here before you started looking? Biocentrism, a hypothesis proposed by Dr. Robert Lanza, turns the familiar picture of the world upside down. We're used to thinking the universe exists, and we are temporary guests in it. But what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness is the foundation of being, and matter is secondary? In this logic, death is not the end of consciousness, but the end of the scenery. According to biocentrism, space and time are not absolute. They do not exist outside us. We do not just observe reality. We create it. Not in the sense of magic, but literally. If you're not looking, there is no outside. This is not poetry, but physics. Quantum experiments show the result depends on the very fact of observation. What does this mean for death? If consciousness does not arise from matter, but is its foundation, there can't be a moment when it simply switches off. The body perception, specific form may disappear, but not perception itself, not what looks. Lanza compares this to a light bulb powered by an outlet. You can turn off one bulb, but the electricity is still there and may light another, or not as light, but as something else, currently inaccessible to us. Many criticize biocentrism as philosophical speculation. But it brings us back to a fundamental question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there an I capable of asking this? And if consciousness is not a product of the brain, but something more, is death really its end? Perhaps we don't die, but merely switch perspective, change the scene, change the point of view, or just keep looking but from the other side of the screen. Level 4. Death as an illusion of time. What if death is not an event, but just an error of perception, not the end of the road, but a single frame on a film reel? At some point, it's replaced by another, but the whole movie is already shot, the whole of it, from start to finish. The idea that time is not a flow but a construction is discussed not only by philosophers but also by physicists. According to the so-called block time theory, all events, past, present, and future, already exist. We just perceive them sequentially, as if looking at a film strip through a narrow slit. Death, in this context, is not disappearance, but the last frame, which, like all others, will always exist. Buddhism and Taoism also have the idea that time is an illusion, that the present never ends. Everything happens here and now, and death is just a change of form within the same indivisible reality. We don't die, we cease to be the observer of a certain segment. Philosopher Julian Barber suggested that time is something we construct from memory. The whole universe is an infinite multitude of moments standing side by side, like photos in an album. We just jump from one to another, creating the illusion of movement. And death is just the last page, but not the disappearance of the book. Some find this theory comforting. If every moment is eternal, your life never disappears. It is simply fixed in the fabric of reality. Others are unnerved. If everything is predetermined, where is freedom? And how do you live knowing everything has already happened? Death as an illusion of time gives no direct answers, but it offers a strange thought. Maybe you have never been born or died. You simply exist as part of some temporal whole. Cultural reincarnation. Sometimes a person does not die, even if they have long been gone. Their name is forgotten, their face erased, yet they continue to live, in words, in gestures, in ideas that do not die. This is not an afterlife in the religious sense, nor transmigration of the soul. This is a return to culture, to the collective fabric of human experience. Cultural reincarnation is when a person, having lived their life, becomes part of something greater. Not mystically, but very concretely. Their behavior becomes an archetype, their story, a legend, their thoughts, quotes repeated by those who never knew them. We say Shakespearean passion, Darwinian approach, Promethean striving, and no longer think that behind these stand once living people. Their bodies are gone, their personalities dissolved, but something of them continues to be reproduced, many times, through others. In Carl Jung's psychology, there is the idea of archetypes, universal images, living in the collective unconscious. The hero, the wise man, the mother. Perhaps each of us partially rewrites these images, adding our own, and then passes them on, unconsciously. Through speech, actions, choices, we inherit and influence at the same time. Modern culture intensifies this process. Memes, movies, texts, images, anything can become a form of return. Someone leaves, but their style, behavior, intonation begin to live in others. Sometimes longer than if they had stayed alive. This is not immortality in the classical sense, rather the blurring of boundaries between personality and culture. We do not persist as whole I, but fragments of us can live for a very long time, sometimes longer than our names. Death of the body may be the end, but sometimes a person leaves and becomes something that is no longer subject to death. Quantum leap into another body. There is a strange idea: you cannot die, not in a philosophical sense, not figuratively, literally. At the moment of death, something jumps. Consciousness, the sense of I, the flow of subjectivity, and wakes up somewhere else. This is not quite reincarnation. There is no karma, gods, or cycle. Not transmigration of the soul, but movement of the point of view. One moment, you are drowning. The next, you are an infant, opening your eyes in another body. Without memories, without connection, but with the same sense, I am. This hypothesis often appears at the intersection of science and science fiction. It is linked to the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. According to one version, every possible alternative is not just a hypothesis, but a real world existing in parallel. And if in one of them you die, in another, you don't. Consciousness simply jumps to where it can continue. You always find yourself in the branch where you are still alive. Philosophically, this is called the theory of quantum immortality, first proposed by physicist Max Tegmark. It sounds intriguing, but also frightening. If you cannot die in your own perspective, does this mean you will survive forever, even in the most awful conditions? Even if it is no longer life, but a chain of pain and slow decay? A disturbing scenario. Consciousness trapped in a body that should have long since died. But it continues to exist because there's nowhere to disappear to. In this version, there is no death, only a change of circumstances. Another you opens their eyes, not knowing they were someone else before. No evidence, no way to check. Only a strange, elusive feeling that you've lived something inside yourself before, just can't remember where or when. Level 5. Unknowability. There is a theory that's different from all the rest. It does not promise heaven, does not threaten hell, does not offer reincarnation or digital immortality. It gives no comfort, but also no threats. It simply says, you will never know, never. Death is a boundary beyond which experience ends. All we can say about it are guesses, intuitions, faith. We build hypotheses, write religions, compose theories, but all of them are about before death, not after. Beyond that line, there is no return, no words to describe what might not even have anyone to describe it. This idea is reminiscent of agnosticism, but only partially. The agnostic says, I don't know, but maybe someday I'll find out. The proponent of unknowability replies differently. I don't know and cannot know. neither I nor anyone else. This is not caution, but acceptance of a limit, not temporary ignorance, but a fundamental one, as if the very question of the afterlife is incorrect, like trying to draw taste or measure loneliness with a ruler. Socrates called death the greatest of all goods, because it is either non-being, like deep dreamless sleep, or something else. But he honestly admitted, "I don't know," and perhaps that was his main wisdom, not in the answer, but in stopping before the abyss and not inventing a bridge. Some philosophers considered the very framing of the question erroneous. As an ant crawling across a book cannot understand the novel, so we, temporal, linguistic, sensory beings, cannot grasp what lies beyond experience and perception. Science, religion, logic, all are powerless when the observer disappears. There are no memories before birth, no verifiable testimonies after death. All that exists is this narrow stretch between the first cry and the last breath. If there really is something beyond it, we will only find out once and won't be able to tell anyone. But this does not make reflections on death meaningless. On the contrary. In this silence, a strange clarity appears. The less we know, the more attentively we live. And suddenly it turns out that small things matter, and every now is all we have. Maybe that is all we are meant to understand about death, that it is not for understanding, but for acceptance.